In this essay, we will delve into the essence of human existence, our perpetual quest for happiness. This investigation, however, veers away from some of the conventional narratives of happiness, and instead scrutinizes the paradoxes inherent in our pursuit of happiness. Our journey traverses the realm of psychology, mythology, and historical accounts, spanning from ancient Greek era to academic studies in the contemporary 21st century. Fasten your seatbelt, friends. You're about to learn how not to be happy. Chapter 1. Happiness can be elusive. If you don't believe me, a quick call to a local psychologist will do. Your 80-something-year-old grandmother, or perhaps if you are not impatient, an honest and deep introspection. But if you have a few minutes to spare, I would like to start with a philosophical trip to Hifra. We need to visit Sisyphus. It remains very valuable to us. Sisyphus was the first king of Hifra. He had so many hobbies, but a popular one was the act of killing almost anything. And he also had a knack for all the nastiest trickeries you can think of that time wouldn't permit me to go through here. Predictably, he finally stepped on some toes. This time it was the gods, Zeus. He tried to play a trick on Zeus but got busted, so he was given an assignment to roll a big rock up a long, steep hill. Just as he was about to reach the top of the hill with the rock, Zeus showed Sisyphus he was the mother of trickery. He engaged in some complicated enchantments that caused the rock to roll away from Sisyphus, and it fell. So, he goes down to pick it up. As he's just about to reach the top again, it falls, ultimately consigning Sisyphus to a brutal, eternal punishment. So much for an assignment. As I say this word, Sisyphus is still battling with the rock. Hopefully, he will be fine. Chapter 2. You don't need a spy to decipher what your neighbor thinks will make them happy. They vote with their feet. But unfortunately, such goals could drive some people nuts. It is at this point I would like to present Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus, one of the wealthiest humans in Roman history, he was into so many things: real estate, slave trade, politics, and so on. He was a co-consul and was among the first triumvirates of Rome, together with Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. He accrued a lot of wealth from shrewd speculative real estate by purchasing bonds or collapsed houses. Fire outbreaks were a norm in ancient Rome, and slaves with excellent architectural acumen so that the slaves could walk on the house, leaving Crassus smiling to the Bank of Rome. But that wouldn't do. He wanted more. He stacked up his wealth through General Sulla's prescription of 82 BC. Prescription is a death sentence or banishment from the state prescribed on the enemies of the state. And when these enemies were banished or killed, their properties were auctioned at an embarrassingly low prices. Crassus, who happened to be Sulla's buddy, was able to slot in names of people who owned property he had coveted into the prescription lists. They got banished or killed, he got the properties, easy does it. He used this tactic to annex vast amount of land in Rome. I even read somewhere he had a network of $2 trillion in today's currency, but I wouldn't put my money on that. His property's worth is estimated to be somewhere around 2 million sesterces. To put this in context, Crassus would be totally capable of fending for about 400,000 poor Roman families in a year, or make close to 500 men rich enough to run for political office in ancient Rome. But these things don't do they? Unfortunately, this one last quest led to his death at the Battle of Cannae in 53 BC, perhaps at the height of his greed, when he invaded the Persia kingdom, largely because of the amount of wealth buried there. After being captured, a widely popular story was that his head was severed and molten gold was poured into his mouth to signify his insatiable thirst for wealth. And friends, what a symbolic death. Crassus was most likely oblivious of the hedonic treadmill, more on that in a minute, even though he experienced it. And he could have probably fared better by listening to the philosophers of his days, the Stoics. But I digress. Let's get back to Sisyphus. Chapter 3. Here is something that is useful to remember. Differential happiness is equal to current happiness minus expected happiness. I know, it's so much happiness. But let's go on, shall we? Let's call this, for lack of a better term, the mathematical approximation of the Sisyphean dilemma, where expected happiness is the happiness expected from achieving a goal, current happiness is the judgment of experienced well-being, what we could call happiness, at a specific moment, and differential happiness is the difference between the current and expected happiness, something to keep track of those expectations. Let's say you hit a jackpot today, a goal you had brutally longed for, like brutally. Differential happiness will equal 0, perhaps a little more than 0. In essence, your current happiness will, at the very least, equal the expected happiness. That is, Sisyphus' rock is at the top of the cliff. However, the moment you begin to settle into your new status, current happiness level will decrease. And because expected happiness remains somewhat constant, unless you could go back in time and change your expectation, most people end up with a negative differential happiness. That is the rock at the bottom of the cliff. Hence, the Sisyphean ordeal. This, friends, is called the hedonic treadmill. But why is this the case, you might ask? The psychologist Nobel Prize laureate Daniel Kahneman actually solved this puzzle, I suppose with some of his colleagues, and he gave the illusion a befitting name, the focusing illusion. Here's the thing. Our shabby assessment of future happiness is caused by the difference between the act of thinking about attaining a goal or a condition and living in that actual condition. However, the mismatch always comes along. At this junction, we can comfortably state the following without any qualms. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. I will let you chew on that for a bit. In the meantime, let's dig up some history. Chapter 4. It is almost impossible to talk about happiness and not mention Epicurus. Born in Samos, died in Athens, he was one of the greatest philosophers of the Hellenic period, the period between the death of Alexander the Great and the emergence of the Roman Empire, in case you are wondering. He champions several philosophies. However, here we'll focus on his hedonistic ethics. Here was what Epicurus taught. Pleasure is the beginning and the goal of a happy life. However, there were great misconceptions, you see. When Epicurus got some grant money to start a school of happiness, called the Garden in Athens, with his friends, the goal was to figure out the source of this happiness thing. But it doesn't take long before rumors started to spread. Rumors of picking sections performed exclusively by gluttons who couldn't figure out exactly when to stop eating, sexual intercourse spree, all in the name of pleasure seeking, lies and rumors. Note that the misconceptions of the Epicureans are carried on thousands of years afterward, up to today. An Epicurean will be thought of someone devoted to sensual enjoyment, especially that derived from fine drink and food, with synonyms like sensualist, sybarite, and pleasure seeker. So, if all those were rumors, what was the garden all about? It was akin to a social experiment to answer the happiness question. This is what the hypothesis looks like. We are happy when we live communally with friends, live simply, engage in meaningful contemplation and self-reflection, and avoid the stiff competition associated with city life. The experiment was a success. It worked out largely. Friendship ranked perhaps the highest. Here, Cicero quotes Epicurus. Of all the things which wisdom has contrived which contribute to a blessed life, none is more important, more fruitful than friendship. In case you are having problems settling with these results, we can fast forward some 2,300 years and see what progress we have made. A recent report from the United States Surgeon General's office indicated that lacking social connections, that is being lonely, carries a health risk equivalent to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Furthermore, modern psychologists have effectively replicated Epicurus' results, where they show that the best predictors of our happiness are quality, positive contact with friends and relatives, and absence of physical pain. In fact, the longest study on happiness, an 85-year-old study from Harvard, effectively replicated this result. And what about money? Let me be clear, poverty makes people miserable. However, the billions aren't guaranteed to make you any happier, even if you think so. In fact, if you take your time and look around, you will quickly notice that fame and wealth are not merely overrated. They are often death traps, waiting patiently for those who are unprepared for its intrigue. For all that has been said, and let's face it, it isn't too difficult to reason our ways to the things that makes us have positive experienced well-being, even if our intuition betrays us. Because we are in constant contact with people, it's impossible for the implications of our relationship to not fill up our emotions. And if it's a relationship that steeps us in a state of fear, anxiety, jealousy, or hatred, what will anyone expect? The Dalai Lama chimes in. People were made to be loved and things were made to be used. The reason why the world is in chaos is because things are being loved and people are being used. Fair enough. One can't beat the drum enough. There's a huge lacuna between what we think will make us happy and what actually does. Let me wrap this up with a very short story. In 1990, a Canadian called Danny Simpson was sentenced to jail for 6 years for robbing a bank of $6,000. Fair enough. He got what he deserved, one could say. Only that he had done the dirty job using a World War I vintage gun valued at up to $100,000. In other words, Danny, our man, used a $100,000 gun to rob a bank of $6,000. That's heavy. What else can be said except to echo a famous philosopher's words? Do not spoil what you have, but desiring what you have not.